Let's cover Aquarius moon, natal moon in Aquarius or moon in the 11th house. This would also be relevant to, Aquarius moons are some of the coolest people. Have great taste in art. You go into their apartment and it might be total chaos, but they have cool stuff from vintage shops before it was like vintage and cool. They're on the cutting edge of taste. They have great aesthetic sense. They have a good sense of style and music, and they just know stuff that you're like, how do you know this? They know about what pogo sticking was like in Bermuda in the 70s, and they know about the countercultural movements in Latin America, and they can tell you also about some obscure record that Brian Eno released that most millennials don't know about. They just have all this insane knowledge, and they feel so safe and comfortable by soaking that up, and it makes them total freaking weirdos and sometimes intimidating. But Aquarius moons, they're awesome people. Sometimes they can have this complex of wanting or needing to be so weird for the sake of being weird that it's just like, dude, just relax, put on a t-shirt. Sometimes they need to be a little bit more flexible, but all right, let's dive in a little bit deeper. If you read a lot of the astrology literature out there, especially a lot of short blurbs that just do a few sentences for each moon sign, a lot of it tends to be pretty negative about the Aquarius moon. There is certainly some challenges with this position, but of course also some incredible gifts. I think the most important thing to know is that Aquarius, it's an air sign, it's ruled by Uranus. It's a very mental sign. It is a sign that is associated with pretty rigid mental structures. Aquarian people with a lot of Aquarian energy, experience the world and derive meaning from the world based on how they intellectually understand it from a big picture. Aquarius can be distinguished from the other air signs, Gemini and Libra, in that Gemini acquires a hodgepodge of a lot of different things and learns and creates meaning from trying to hold all those things simultaneously, but never totally being an expert in any of them. Libra, obviously, the stereotype, and it also is pretty fitting way to think about the archetype is the scale. They can see both sides of an issue. Aquarius, again, they tend to be very fixed. It's a fixed sign. And so it's interesting because Uranus, that's the planet of upheaval, of sudden change, of Promethean level change sometimes. And so why is then Aquarius also considered a fixed sign? You think about Aquarius, the Aquarius intellect as living through paradigms, living life through very kind of carefully constructed worldview. And so while they're locked with their blinders on and they're locked in that paradigm, it's a little bit hard for them to see sometimes other perspectives. It's hard for them to sometimes take other people's advice, right? Like they have a certain way that they think about things. They have certain beliefs, and it's hard to twist their arm into it. They really have to learn their own lessons. And the sudden change happens, the Promethean change happens for Aquarians when there's that sudden paradigm shift. There's something significant enough that draws them away from their blinders or makes them move away from them long enough for the whole system to collapse. And that's the sudden change. But it's not sudden change like happening up and down all over the place. It's fixed, very fixed, intense mental energy for an extended period of time. And then maybe there's this opportunity for it all to be busted open. It's also why Aquarians are sometimes known for being sort of like all or nothing type of people. It's either like total perfection and mastery, or it's chaos and self-sabotage and that kind of thing. Now, we're talking about Aquarian energy in the context of the moon, right? The moon represents our inner personality, our instinctual personality. it's very ingrained and subconscious, and it's not necessarily like in our DNA, but it's very much in our nurture and our nature and how we were raised, how we became familiar with the world, what our experience was like in our family and with our parents. Like those things all conditioned and primed our most instinctual reactions. And so the way that we feel when we have a crush on someone, or when we get angry or sad, or how we feel safe, that's all kind of moon sign energy. And so when we're talking about such a hardcore intellectual zodiac sign in the moon position, it can be a challenge. One of the amazing gifts of this position is that Aquarian moons have a very sharp mind and a sharp ability to describe and create narratives and diagnose their emotional life. Maybe not their own emotional life, well, sometimes, but especially like emotional dynamics of other people, right? They're not so good at being in the thick of an intense emotional moment and knowing what to say. It's not that kind of emotional intelligence. It's being around a person and observing them, and then being able to go back and say, yeah, that was like sublimation and they were projecting this. Aquarians are usually pretty good at describing it, but they're not always right. Put another way, that way of experiencing and engaging emotions is also somewhat limited, because emotions do ultimately need to be felt and experienced, and you got to jump in the pool. You can't just like observe it. So one thing that you'll sometimes see with Aquarian moons is that they can be like a therapist for other people, and they can provide objective reflection back to the other person. It's not always like empathetic or kind support, but it can be really awesome. And they demonstrate their love and their care through helping people understand and maybe talk through and prompt them into certain realizations. Sometimes Aquarian moons they can go overboard with this, and they can be a little bit too, I would say, like judgmental, or again, just be too mental bound in their interactions with people. The things that they do form attachments to, that do make them feel safe, they remain very committed to those things, even if it seems like sometimes they're a little bit detached or aloof. An Aquarius moon is definitely an independent kind of person. It's not independent like an Aries moon, which is a more of a emotional, strong-willed, kind of spunky, playful need to kind of feel like they're on their own and don't need anyone. Aquarius moon is sometimes more of a cold detachment. It's an independence that's born out of sometimes like intellectually and soberly realizing that there's limitations in personal connection, and there's like these moments where, try as hard as we might, like there's always going to be language barriers between people, even people that speak the same language. Aquarian moons need that time to bask in their thoughts. Their minds are very active, and there's sometimes a little bit of a somberness there, and they don't necessarily respond well to being forced to doing things or being guilted. That only sort of like pushes or like further incites that Aquarian independence, because again, they feel like that prompting is more emotionally based, and they're experiencing the world and making their decisions more from their intellectual framework. And they see an intellectual framework where we're a collective society. They're very humanitarian and civically inclined, but they also see the importance of cultivating independent fulfillment and independent nourishment, if you will. There's also something really nice about an Aquarian moon and being friends with them. They're so steadfast. You see the fixed sign energy. Even if you haven't talked to that person in a few weeks or a few years, if there was a bond, that bond will always be there. It's enduring. It's a love that is in some ways higher order, even though it's intellectual. It doesn't have to be nurtured. It's not always so ego-driven. It's just there, and you don't have to worry about it, which is awesome. Aquarius moon's recognition, or the value they place on individuality, originality, and again, at the emotional level, at a very raw level, is something that makes them awesome. And while they're not always the best at maybe like overtly demonstrating emotions or showing affection or kind of demonstrating that messiness, they're very open-minded in a broad sense. They're open to different perspectives. They are not necessarily as afraid or driven by social norms or social expectations. They're not emotionally driven by a desire to feel normal. They don't necessarily need to be accepted or validated by society to feel safe. And so that's an awesome quality. It also makes Aquarius moons, just like all of us, somewhat of a contradiction, right? They can be judgmental, but they're open-minded. I would say the judgmentalness is more on the outer layer, because it's just how they're experiencing and understanding the world. But underneath that, again, it's a radical openness to the new, to the different, to the innovative, and more than just being tolerant of it. I think they need to be exposed to that. They need to feel different in some way in order to feel comfortable, feel safe. And that can go sometimes far in the other direction too. Sometimes it's this hard-headedness about not wanting to just step in line, resisting this idea that their life is just very typical and normal, and they're doing just a very socially prescribed thing. They get so fixated on that, or they attach so much importance to it, that they end up, self-sabotaging themselves or alienating themselves, or sometimes just making life more difficult because there's some level of conformity and normality inherent in life and in living in a civilized society with a social contract and a certain set of sort of cultural, social norms, whatever. An Aquarius moon is going to do well with a partner or people that understand their need for independence, understand their high need for intellectual stimulation, can sort of meet them intellectually, and also won't necessarily demand Aquarius moon to be someone that they're not. I think it's a tough pairing with a water moon. They're just different. They're are going to approach emotions in a way that's can be challenging, and the fixed nature of the air moon, the Aquarius moon, I think makes that air moon particularly challenging for water moons. But again, other things in the whole chart, in the synastry comparison and the composite can make up for that or counterbalance it. That's it for now. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you soon.